Hey everyone, Lawrence here from Unicorn Bikes. It seems like absolutely everyone is going for a mullet these days. 29 in the front, 27.5 in the back. It seems to make a lot of sense, and a lot of brands are now calling it MX instead of mullet. However, all those brands are missing one crucial thing. Look at this dirt bike. As you can see, the front wheel is bigger, but it's also thinner, whereas the rear wheel is smaller, but the tire is much thicker. For many years now, I've wanted to do this to a hardtail mountain bike. Not because I produce so much power that I need a wider tire, but for traction under braking and just comfort when riding. And so earlier this month, I was browsing the internet, and on the Decathlon website of all places, I found a €100 wheel that was 36 millimeters of internal diameter. And on that same Decathlon website, for only €30, I could get a 3-inch wide mountain bike tire. So I grabbed a measuring tape and I measured 3.3 inches of rear tire clearance on the size large Canyon Stoic frame. That means I have 0.15 inches of clearance either side, so with my relatively bad riding, I'm not gonna flex the wheel heaps and it should be enough clearance. Also for mud, plenty of clearance. Doing the calculations on the height of the tire, the rear wheel would only be 10 millimeters less tall at the top of the tire than the front wheel, meaning the axle is only 5 millimeters lower. What that then translated to when measuring it on the bike is a 2 millimeter drop in bottom bracket height and an immeasurable, with my phone at least, head angle and seat tube angle difference. It's probably gotten ever so slightly slacker, but my phone cannot measure this. So with calculations and measurements out of the way, it's finally time to try out the difference between the Hansdampf 29 by 2.3 inch wide rear tire and the VT Fatty 3-inch wide 650B plus tire. Of course, you don't need me to tell you that these are completely different tires with different compounds, different thread and a different sidewall. So the real measurements really are not very scientific here at all. I wish there were two identical tires just in a different size for me to compare against each other, but sadly in 2024 plus tires are super dead and no one's using them, so I was actually quite lucky to find at least a 3-inch wide tire. If I were to go down to a 2.8 or even a 2.6, which is the widest most brands offer these days, I feel like the geometry would change more and I would more be testing the difference in geometry than the difference in tire width. What's really important with mountain bike tires is your pressure, but with plus size tires and especially fat bike tires, it gets way more important. So I ran 23 psi in the front and I ran 18 psi in the rear. I could probably go ever so slightly lower, but I don't have an insert in there and I could not get this tire on tubelessly because cheap wheel with a cheap tire, it just doesn't fit very well at all. I'm not going to pretend that I'm a top level mountain biker at all. I am overweight, my posture is horrible and I have the steez levels of, well, a sack of bricks. I suck at riding mountain bikes, but I do feel like I'm qualified to at least tell you the comfort level between a skinny rear tire and a big rear tire. So that's what we'll mostly be focusing on. And so what are my findings? Let's start with the positive, because I'm such a positive person. First off, I noticed this tire rolls a lot faster than the Schwalbe Hansdampf on the back. Is that because of the lower pressures? Is it because it's wider? Is it because it's a completely different tire? Probably the latter. So it's not really worth comparing that, but I did notice, if we're just comparing these two tires, that this one rolls ever so slightly better than the Hansdampf. The VT Fatty is a very fast rolling tire, and if you look at the thread pattern you can see why. My second positive finding is actually relevant to this video. It's the harshness when landing drops and jumps. And when you land a jump or a drop, especially with my skill level, you can feel that it's just a little bit more plush. It's not like riding a downhill bike, not at all. But it just takes that sharpness out of the landing, which I really appreciate. And I think when you're riding this bike in a bike park all day, at the end of that day, your wrists, but definitely your feet and your ankles are going to thank you for riding a way wider but way lower pressure tire. A very hard one for me to judge would be cornering. Not just because I can't corner very well, but because it's just two completely different tires. The side knobs on the Hansdampf are much more pronounced than they are on the T-Fatty I have over here on the bike right now. So really no comment about cornering at all. Where I can definitely notice an improvement is climbing, especially rougher climbs. This bike now feels like a cross-country full suspension bike without the shock locked out. It feels plush, And you can really feel and even hear that big tire conform to roots and rocks when you're going up a hill. At this sort of slow speed, the formation really is quite good on this tire. When you get up to higher speeds though, you really start noticing that this is a cheap rear tire. There's not as much damping in the sidewall as you have with more high-end tires. Now I'm not going to say it's bouncing around all the time, because actually the bouncing is quite a lot better on the T-Fatty than it is on the Hans Dampf. So something I really struggle with when riding hardtails is keeping that rear tire on the ground under braking, especially over chattery terrain. Not only is my front brake almost locked and ready to throw me over the bars at any given time, but also hardtails are just bumpy in the back, and so you hit one little thing and the wheel goes up and you're done braking on the rear wheel. I found that with the T-Fatty on here, that was noticeably better. Now I had two things in mind that would improve with this sort of tire setup, which would be comfort, and we already discussed it, comfort is heaps better, but also braking on chattery terrain is heaps better with the big tire than it is with the little tire. Again, a better tire with better damping on that sidewall would be even better than what we have right now, but I think this is already quite good. What's not so good though is when it gets muddy. When it gets muddy, this tire does not bite in at all, because it's fairly small knobs and a very large surface area. And so whereas the Hans Dampf would just cut through the top slippery layer into the solid dirt below, this one just starts floating on top, and it got super sketchy once the terrain got muddy. So don't go with this setup if it's muddy. Just keep your 29-inch with a skinnier tire around, keep that wheel around for muddy riding. And so it is time for a conclusion. Now, I'm not lying when I say that I wanted to do this for many years. I always thought it was a brilliant idea in my head, and I even joked on Instagram saying this is not just the best idea I ever had, it's the best idea anyone's ever had. Obviously a joke. This is not a perfect solution. If you're riding on very rocky terrain, for example, you will not want to have a tire like this, because it will puncture, because plus tires are horrible. You can't find a lot of them and they are all super flimsy and thin. If you're riding somewhere very muddy, this tire won't work. It will just start floating on the top layer and you'll go straight with your face into a tree. However, if those trees and the ground around it are dry, this is perfect. This is so good over dry routes. This is so comfortable to ride for long distances. It rolls really well. It turns into corners really well because it's like a round profile tire without side knobs. This is perfect for dry rides in the woods. Everything else, it sucks. But dry rides in the woods, this is great. So should you immediately stop watching this video, rush to the nearest bike component store and buy a plus size rear tire for your hardtail? Probably not. However, if you are struggling with harshness, with your hardtail being too hard, maybe this is perfect for you. Go ahead, give it a try. This whole setup cost me 135 euros. That's 100 for the wheel, 30 for the tire, and 5 for the inner tube because I couldn't get tubeless to work. So it's a lot cheaper than getting a new frame if you are struggling with a very harsh hardtail. And it's just a fun experiment, and people will probably come up to you and talk about it, and you'll make a lot of new friends just because you have a strange tire combination on your bike. Anyway, I'm keeping this around. I had a blast testing this. This is really fun, really cool idea, I think personally, but let me know in the comments below what you think, and if you have any other sort of strange experiments with bikes that you would like to see. For now, thank you all very much for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.